Hello, it's Becky, and welcome to Bee Mom. We're doing our Friday story, and I am picking back up in the book of Beatrix Potter with Peter Rabbit. We read Peter Rabbit before, and as I was looking, I was noticing that those stories seem to be very popular. So I'm going to go ahead and read another one about Peter Rabbit's cousin. His name is Benjamin Bunny. One morning, a little rabbit sat on the bank, and he pricked his ears and listened to a trick-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road, and it was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off with a hop, skip, and a jump to call in his relations, who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. Here's pictures for... And there he is, running off. Take the cover off this book to make it easier to read. Skip this out of the video. The wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow, and she earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffets. I once bought a pair at the bazaar, and she also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled on top of Cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself, and he looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who's got your clothes?" We know, don't we? Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and he described how he'd been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out on a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and were certainly gone for the day because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said that he hoped it would rain, and at this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole. "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch me some more chamomile." Peter said that he thought he might feel better if we went for a walk. We'll do the other pictures in a minute, but there's Peter talking to his cousin, and they're listening to his mother say something. They went away hand in hand and got upon the flat top of the wall at the front of the wood, and from here they looked into Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen on the scarecrow, and topped with a tam o' shanter of Mr. McGregor's, which is a kind of hat. Little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in is to climb down the pear tree." And Peter fell down on his head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuce. So here they are. Oops. Looking out, and we can see Peter's clothes on the scarecrow. I think these boys are getting into some trouble. They left a great many odd little footmarks all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs, and little Benjamin said that the first thing to be done was get Peter's clothes back. and in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took them off the scarecrow, and there had been a rain in the night, and so there was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam o' shanter, but it was too big for him. There they are, seeing all the footy prints. And look at him with that big funny hat on. Then he suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself, and he kept hearing noises. I'll bet he did. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home and was helping himself to a lettuce leaf. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of Benjamin's papa was Old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were fine. There they are with the onions. And there they are munching lettuce. Peter did not eat anything and said he should like to go home, and presently he dropped half the onions. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back in the pear tree with a load of vegetables, and he led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. They went along a little walk on planks and under the sunny red brick wall. And the mice sat on the doorsteps cracking cherry stones, and they winked at Peter Rabbit and Little Benjamin Bunny. Oh, see, he dropped his onions. And do you see the little mice? They're watching them walk by. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst flower pots and frames and tubs, and Peter heard noises. They were worse, and his eyes were as big as lollipops. He was in a step or two in front of his cousin when he suddenly stopped. And then, oh dear, he hears the noises. Let's find out what happens. This page is being unhappy. Aha! This is what those little rabbits saw around that corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then, less than half a minute later, he had hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. The cat got up and stretched himself and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down on top of the basket. There's the kitty cat that they saw. And there's the kitty cat looking at the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. That's half the day. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful, and it made Peter Rabbit and Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar that fell from the wall above, and the cat looked up and saw Old Benjamin Bunny prancing around on top of the wall on the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe with rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. This is an old story. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats, and he took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall and on to the top of the cat, and cuffed it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat, too, was much surprised to have a scratched back. And when old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. And then he came to the basket. And he took out his son Benjamin, and he whipped him with the switch, which means he spanked his little Fanny. And he took out his nephew Peter, and he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. And when Mr. McGregor returned about a half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over his garden with little tiny clogs. They were ridiculously little, and also he could not understand how the cat had managed to shut herself inside the greenhouse, locking the door from the outside. There is Mr. McGregor jumping on the cat. And there is Mr. McGregor giving his little son a spanking for disobeying. And there they are walking out. Oh, they do not look like happy little. And there's perplexed Mr. McGregor. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him because she was glad to see that he'd found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with a bunch of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. The end. And that's our story for today. Now, I have other things, moms and dads, on my Be Mom channel, and I would sure love if you would go on and see what you like and subscribe and like this video if you like it. And I hope your children are enjoying these stories because I really enjoy reading them, and Peter Rabbit is actually one of my favorites. So, thank you very much, and we will see you later, and enjoy time next Friday.